Hello, Game Boys and Game Girls. I'm the Game Boy Guru, and yes, I shaved my face, and yes, I'm wearing the same T-shirt as the last video that I made because I'm actually recording the videos the same evening, but based on the editing and everything else I need to do, they probably won't get uploaded the same day. So you just get to see me and this lovely ensemble the same way twice. So I mentioned in the other video that my goodie box video that I went out on a trip for my birthday, and I basically spent the whole weekend, other than a little bit of family time, game hunting. And so I thought I would do just a quick recap of the trip and then show you everything I got. And as I mentioned in the goodie box video, I went buck wild. So I have a lot to show you. This is probably going to be a bit of a longer pickups vid, but I had a lot of fun, and I think you guys will agree that I got some pretty cool pickups. So let's just go through it. I took off Friday from work so I could go and just go out and do some hunting. And there were two particular larger cities that I wanted to hit that are kind of close in proximity. So I left after work on Friday, went and hit one store that was on the way to the first city, and because it's about halfway between where I live and this first city. And so I thought I'd show you what I got at that store on my first night. And I think this already starts things off pretty well. So I grabbed a bunch of random stuff at this store. I got 3 random Atari games at this store. I got video pinball. I got Kangaroo, which you will have seen in a previous video, but this one includes the end label, so that's an upgrade, and that's a pretty clean copy. Also got Phoenix. I picked up a random Super NES, or not so random Super NES game, and that is D-Force, a notoriously bad shoot 'em up, but as a shoot 'em up fan and someone who is trying to collect as many shmups as possible, this is one I didn't have, and that's not a terrible price for it, so I decided to go for it. I picked up also a seemingly random NES game, and that is Strider. Not so random because big fan of the Genesis version of Strider and subsequently the arcade version. My best friend growing up had the Strider NES game, and I played it and I didn't get it. And then when I got my Genesis a year or so later and got Strider for it, I had to laugh because I felt like I had the superior version. However, knowing how Capcom handled a lot of their arcade to home conversions now, with things like Bionic Commando, with the NES port being vastly superior, and things like that, I think I may appreciate this game more now than I did as a kid. So I kind of want to put some time into this and see what I think of it in 2017 versus, say, 1990 or thereabouts, when I would have played this around the first time. Picked up this when I saw it on the shelf. That is Tom and Jerry for the Game Boy Color. It's complete, so that was kind of fun to find for $5. Complete. I grabbed another totally random thing, which is a long box copy of Battle Area Toshinden for the original PlayStation. And so I've got the Game Boy version, I've got this, and now at some point I just need Battle Area Toshinden Remix on the Saturn to have all 3 versions. And random wheat pick, Geometry Wars Galaxies. Not strictly a shmup, but I've heard good things about the Geometry Wars games. I actually have never played any of them. I know it was kind of a big thing with the Xbox 360, Xbox Live Arcade, and some of that stuff. So kind of looking forward to playing that because I've enjoyed a couple of similar games on iOS via my phone and iPad and so forth. So actually being able to play something on a console with hopefully better control should be fun. So that was the pickups that I had at the first store I hit halfway to my destination. Now to start with day one, it was a really big day. And I started off by hitting a couple of thrift stores, nothing too big. Um, Hit a couple of things. Didn't really find much at the first three or four stores that I went to. And so I changed my tactic and started going instead of to Goodwills and other thrift stores. I started going to pawn shops next. And I hit pay dirt at the very first pawn shop that I went to. A lot of their current and last gen stuff I felt was overpriced, but I found a tub full of Atari 2600 games, and most of these had ridiculously high prices on little tags that were taped to the back of the carts. And so there was a guy walking around who saw that I was kind of like scoffing at these prices, and he asked if he could help me, and I showed him one, and I said, "Are these the actual prices? Because this is ridiculous." I held up a Journey Escape card. Of course, I have Journey Escape, but the price on the back said something like $25, and I said, "This is a $2 game." I said, "So obviously either you guys are way over pricing these, or someone didn't know what they were doing." He said, "Well, someone probably just looked them up online and then wrote prices on." So he said, "I'll work with you on them." So he said, get a stack of the ones you want, and then we'll go look them up, and I'll make you a deal. So he did, and all of these games I picked up for far less than any of the prices that were on the tags on the back. And I think I got a pretty good deal, considering that a handful of these I would say are a bit more on the rare to sought after side. So let's just go in order of how they are in the bag. We got Alien, Fast Eddie, and this one's not in terrific shape. Kind of got some ripping on the label there, but apparently that's a good game from what I hear. We got MASH, which I did not know received a 2600 game. I don't know if this has showed up on any other systems, Atari computers, or any other consoles, but interesting that the MASH got a game. And I don't know if that's based on the MASH movie or the TV show. My guess is the TV show. I got Hero, which is cool to have. I know that's one that Metal Jesus has at the beginning of every episode. You see him plugging the Hero card in at some form in almost all of the intros that he does. So cool to have that one. I got The Earth Dies Screaming, which is apparently a bit pricier and more rare. The tag on the back said $35, and I got it for much less than that. So pretty glad to have that. Kung Fu Master. Be interesting to see how that compares, this compares to the arcade game, and then also to what we saw later on the NES, which I played a fair amount growing up. Capcom's Commando got a port by Activision. That I think Mark from CGR said that was reasonably good. Miner 2049er, and that's the same cover art that's used on the Game Boy game. So I will be definitely, when it's time to review this on the Game Boy, I will be putting time into this 2600 version so I can compare and contrast the two. I was very happy to see this one. This is Jawbreaker, and according to the Single Banana, buddy of mine on Twitter and fellow compatriot over at RF Generation, he says that this is not only a favorite of his, but also one that's a bit more rare. And you don't see colored carts on the 2600 too often. The actual outer plastic on this one's damaged a bit. It's got a crack in it, but otherwise it's in reasonable shape, other than a little ripping on the label there. But he really likes this game, so I'm going to have to check that out. We got Beam Rider, which I also have on the ColecoVision, so be interesting to compare the two. I got No Escape, one of many iMagic games on the 2600. Hadn't heard of this particular one, but Pretty cool. That looks like Pegasus and I can't remember the Greek mythological figure um, right off the top of my head. Pressure cooker, which apparently is also a bit more hard to find, maybe. A lot of Activision titles were pretty common for the system, but this one may not have been as big a seller as something like Chopper Command or Kaboom. Private Eye, which I'd not heard of by Activision. I'm assuming this is a later release because the label is a bit more. Yeah, this is 1984, so that would have been after the crash or during the crash. Got Frogger, which I remember playing quite a bit of growing up because my next door neighbor had it and we played a ton of Frogger. And finally at this store, a game called Bugs by Data Age. I'd never heard of this or seen this anywhere. Cool artwork though, with sort of this insect on the front and the targeting reticle there. So I'm assuming that you're a bit of an exterminator, but it uses the paddle controller. So now that I have a set of paddles, it'll be fun to kind of test that out. So that was my first stop on day 2, if you will, or full day 1 of shopping. So that started things off with a bang, and that was good. But I just kept, scoring good deals throughout the day. So then the next pawn shop that I hit, I got some cool stuff. I picked up 2 PSP games, NCAA Football 09 and NBA 08, featuring Block Party, whatever that means. But cool to have those. Platinum Hits version of Bioshock, and I mentioned in an earlier video that I had Bioshock Infinite and then Bioshock 2. Now I have Bioshock, so I can go back and play the whole series in chronological release order. And along with those 3 items, I picked up the only Sega Genesis 6-button pad they had. It's a little beat up. It's got a break in the cable hair, and this is a little chewed up, and it's really grungy. So it's definitely going to need some TLC. I'm probably going to take it apart and give the top portion an alcohol bath, and maybe the bottom portion as well. Definitely going to need to take a Q-tip to it with some alcohol and really clean it up. And I'm assuming I'm going to need to clean it up inside too. But the action on the buttons all feel good, and the D-pad, I'm assuming, feels good. I've never actually played with a 6-button Genesis pad because I've never owned one, and I never knew anybody that had one because by the time the 6-button pad was a thing, most everyone had moved on to the Super Nintendo, or I was busy, dating my girlfriend and stuff like that in high school, and so I never had one of these before, and for whatever reason, I've just never picked one up. I've only ever used 6-button joysticks, so glad to finally have an official Sega 6-button pad. I stopped at another store and got Final Fantasy II for PSP. So now I've got Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 4, and I have Tactics, what is it, War of the Lions, the greatest hits version. So now I need the original version of Tactics, and then I also need Dissidia 012 or whatever it is, the second Dissidia title. So yeah, I'm closing in on having all the PSP Final Fantasy games. Let's see here. I stopped at here we go. I stopped at another store that I usually go to, a game store, and picked up a decent stack of games. No, not this one. Let's start with another store first. I went to one of the game stores that I go to frequently when I'm in the city. Is a good place. They have really good selection. I picked up some ColecoVision stuff there. So I finally got a copy of Gorf. I also grabbed the ColecoVision version of Venture and Space Panic, which I don't believe I've heard of. So that'll be interesting. I grabbed some more PSP stuff at that store. Um, Something that my buddy Zagnorch told me about, which was the Mercury 2-in-1 set. He mentioned it to me because he had asked me if I needed the Archer McLean's Mercury, which I already have. I told him no, and then he told me about this one. And then literally within like 30 minutes of him texting me that, I found it. So that was kind of funny, I thought. I grabbed Napoleon Dynamite, the game, which I'm sure is just a terrible minigame collection, but huge fan of the movie. Got the soundtrack on vinyl. Had to have it for the PSP collection, so all of that adds up to a buy. Got Practical Intelligence Quotient, which I'm assuming is, yeah, it says a puzzle game. So looks interesting, kind of a quasi, I don't know, like a puzzle game version of Rez almost. So could be interesting. Pocket Pool. Yep, that's all I got to say about that. Untold Legends, Brotherhood of the Blade. I've had the other Untold Legends game for about a year now. Finally found this in the wild. So now I've got both of these on the PSP. And then Gangs of London, which I think may have been released on the PS2 and possibly the Xbox as well. And this store almost always delivers the goods for me with Game Boy games. They almost always have something that I don't have already. So I was able to pick up a handful of carts. Of course, I'm going for a US set, but whenever they have Japanese stuff, I usually pick it up. So this is Game Boy Gallery, which I believe is the first Game & Watch Gallery cart. I got Out of Gas, which I've never heard of, but based on this, it looks like it could be maybe a racing game or some kind of, I don't know, action vehicle game, kind of like Spy Hunter. So I'll be interested to see that. The first WWF Superstars game, which for some reason is more expensive than I thought it was going to be. Got Mad Magazine's Spy vs. Spy. Of course, the NES and Sega Master System both had Spy vs. Spy games. Don't know if this is similar or if it's a different thing. We'll see. Spider-Man 2, which is interesting because the original was The Amazing Spider-Man, and this is not The Amazing Spider-Man, it's just Spider-Man 2. Of course, the first Spider-Man Game Boy game is not very well loved, and I don't think this one fares too much better in terms of critical reception, so we'll see what that's like. So that was one of the game stores that I went to. Another of the game stores, and there goes my phone. Another one of the games, there was another store that I went to that I just found because I was just looking to see if there were any other game related places I could go to, and apparently this store has been there for a year and a half, and I've been to the city multiple times and didn't know about it. However, I know now, and so next time I go back, I'm going to go check it out because I picked up a bunch of stuff and I thought their prices were reasonably good. So, a couple of PSP games I did not know about, which are Dungeons and Dragons Tactics and Lord of the Rings Tactics. I had no idea these existed, so cool to find these and at a decent price. Mercury Meltdown. So now I have Archer McLean's Mercury, I have Mercury Meltdown, and I have the 2-in-1. So I have all three of these on the PSP. And I have the PS2 Meltdown Remix, I think it is. So if I ever have an itching to play these Meltdown games, I'm covered. I also got Armored Core Formula Front Extreme Battle. I've not played any of the Armored Core series, but again, mech games, they look like they could be fun, so we'll check that out. And finally scored a copy of Battlefront 2 for the PSP. The Elite Squadron still eludes me. I almost picked up a copy of that at another store, but it was missing the manual. Always with the manual. So, anyway, was disappointed with that. But at this same store, they had a ton of Game Boy games that I didn't already have. So let me get these out of the bag here and we can go through them real quick. So I've got NBA Live 96, Championship Pool, Goal, which I have to yell, of course, because it's got an exclamation point behind it. Battleship. So I finally have the actual Battleship game on the Game Boy. Of course, I've had Radar Mission, which I have reviewed, Torpedo Range, and I think there's one other Battleship clone. But now I have the actual Battleship game. Infogenius Personal Organizer, which is always interesting to see stuff like that on the Game Boy. Pack Attack. And then a handful of slightly pricier titles like Krusty's Funhouse, Monster Truck Wars, which I'm assuming is going to be a train wreck. Introducing The Humans by Game Tech. That was on the NES, I think, as well. Beavis and Butthead, which I passed up at the previous store because I didn't want to pay as much as they were asking, and this store had it cheaper, so cool to find that. The Game Boy version of Zen Intergalactic Ninja, which is much less expensive than its NES counterpart, which is this I believe is a side-scrolling action platformer, beat-em-up, hack-and-slash game. The NES game is sort of like a isometric, over-behind kind of 3D action game, and the game store that's closest to me, which is still an hour away, but they have a copy of the NES version, and they want, I think, something like $80 for it. Might be over $100 now. I'd have to go and look. And then this is a Game Boy title I'd never heard of, called Great Greed, but it's by Namco, and hopefully that means it will be decent. It looks like it could be either a RPG of some kind or possibly just a hack and slash action adventure game. So nice haul at that store. The next game store I went a little lighter. They didn't have quite as much that I felt like I had to have. So I got one Game Boy game, and that's Paperboy 2, which apparently changes up the formula slightly, I'm told, by trying to add like a story mode. But if they didn't fix the gameplay, sadly, this is probably going to be as much of a train wreck as the first one. And one that I was quite excited about, Shantae Half Genie Hero. Really, really enjoyed Shantae and the Pirate's Curse on Wii U. Fun game, kind of a lighthearted Metroidvania style game with, of course, fantastic music by, I believe, Jake Kaufman did the soundtrack for that. So if the gameplay and the music in this are half as good as the Pirate's Curse, this will be a joy to play. And this is complete since it's a new release, has the soundtrack CD. Really looking forward to pulling that out. And like I say, if the soundtrack on this is half as good as the other, the CD won't leave my car for weeks because it's absolutely fantastic. So that was game store number 3. I hit another store and picked up, let's see here. Gotta remember where I'm at here. I think that's all I did on day 2, I want to say. Yeah. So like the first full day, I'll call that day one because the first day that I went out, it was literally just driving to get to where I was going. So day two, it was in a different city. I got started late because after the end of day one, um, I went and had dinner and a movie, and I got really sick from dinner. And so I ended up back at the hotel and I was sick, and then I had to get a late checkout the next day. And so I didn't get started until much later. But when I did, um, I, I had some success. So I went to a pawn shop, which is actually part of the chain of the pawn shop that I like to frequent the most in my area. Picked up a couple things there. So I got Hard Rock Casino on PSP. And lo and behold, another copy of Untold Legends Brotherhood of the Blade, this time Greatest Hits. So now I have this. I will have to look and see if the other Untold Legends game on PSP got a GH release, because if it did, that's all I need probably to complete the set. Um, Finally got myself a copy of Brutal Legend. Looking forward to playing this game because I'm a huge fan of heavy metal music. That's one of my other passions besides video games is music, and hard rock and heavy metal are my favorite styles. So this is right up my alley. And then I picked up Fear 2 Project Origin for Xbox 360. Apparently these Fear games are supposed to be really good, so check that out. So that was one pawn shop. Let's see, I went and gotta remember my order here. I went to another game store and picked up. That was stop number 3. I went to another game store and yes, got a whole ton of things. All right, so I went to one game store and got some PSP stuff. Um, so we got Iron Man 2, Justice League Heroes, which I've seen in the wild many times, but usually without the manual. Dungeon Siege Throne of Agony. Yeah, Throne of Agony. Looks a bit like a Diablo-esque type game. I know there was a Dungeon Siege game, I want to say on the original PlayStation maybe. And then finally, God's Eater Burst. This is apparently a really good game that I just missed out on earlier in the PSP's life. So this I should have some fun with. I got one N64 game. It's a little beat up, but I finally got Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, which is apparently quite good. Got some Game Boy games I didn't have. Always happy to score a handful of those. And so I got NHL 96, Blades of Steel. Happy to find Battletoads in Ragnarok World, or Ragnarok's World, which is actually a conversion of the NES game. The first Battletoads game that came out on Game Boy was actually its own semi-original title that just sort of used the style of the NES game. But this is really actually a conversion of the NES game. Also found King of Fighters 95 and The Simpsons Itchy and Scratchy, which I'm expecting to not be very good because none of the Simpsons games are very good. And this was a good find as well. This is a Nintendo 64 Super Pad 64 Plus, and this should make gaming on the N64 more fun. One of the things I don't like about the N64 is the giant, unwieldy boomerang controller. This is much more like a standard gamepad where I can hold it like this in one hand. I've got access to everything. without having to move my hand down. You know, it's much more comfortable. The layout I like. Um, Everything feels good. The trigger button, the Z trigger button, is down here. Um, so for games that require that, you know, that's right there accessible, and I can choose to either use my index finger for it or keep it up on the shoulder and use my middle finger for the Z targeting. The analog stick action's good. It recenters properly, and um, there's no play in it with that. So this looks like it's been used but not abused. So it's in really good shape. Otherwise, it's D-pad feels good, buttons all feel good. So I'm really liking this, and this will encourage me to get back into the N64 some because I got a couple of games I need to finish and a few more that I haven't put any time into that I'd like to, and this might help me do that. So that was a great find at that particular store. The other store that I went to, that's the same chain, I got a ton of stuff. I got one lone Game Boy game that I hadn't heard of, but it's Konami. It's Ultra Golf, released under the Ultra label. So as you can see there by the label, it looks like it says Ultra Golf, which is kind of funny. But hadn't heard of that one yet. So we'll see what that's like. Bunch of PSP stuff at this other store. They had a ton of PSP games, including what looked like almost the entire PSP sports game library. Probably wasn't, because there are a lot of PSP sports games, but they had a very large case full of them. So let's go through these quickly. We got Ape Escape Academy, Wall-E, and I've never seen this movie, so I have no idea what that's going to be like. X-Men Origins Wolverine, and this is actually still in the plastic. So I always ask them if they can check to make sure the manual's in there before I say whether I want to add it to my stack. And I said, "Is the manual in that one?" And he pulled it out and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is still sealed. Definitely has the manual." Grip Shift, which looks like sort of a racing stunt driving game. They had two copies of this, one that didn't have the manual and then this one that did. Tom Clancy's End War, which I also have for the 360. I didn't know this got a PSP release. And this is looks to be a good old RTS game, so could be some fun on there. I showed Iron Man 2 earlier. Now I have Iron Man. So I don't think either of these games reviewed very well, but need them for the collection, and I like Iron Man, so why not? The Spider-Man Web of Shadows Amazing Allies Edition. So I'm not sure how it differs from the console versions, but sure. This, I guess, also has Nightcrawler, Storm, Shocker, Mysterio, Hobgoblin, and more. So plenty of Marvel stuff going on there. Lego Pirates of the Caribbean. One of the Lego games I didn't have. I think there might only be one or two now that I don't have on the PSP. And Shaolin Showdown, which looks to be kind of an arena fighting game, possibly. Anyway, that's PSP stuff. And then I also got another controller, and taking a bit of a chance here, but I'm hoping that this will pay off. I was trying to find out if anybody had Saturn pads, and the first store that I went to that I got those Game Boy games and the handful of PSP titles, and then that N64 Super Pad, they had three different Model 2 Sega Saturn pads, but two of them were really beat up. One of them had good action across all the buttons and the D-pad, but the wiring was pulled out and didn't look very good. The second one was really beat up, and I mean, looked like somebody had taken the pad and scratched it on the sidewalk. so I didn't really want to go with that. The one that did look good had good action on all the buttons except for the Z button on the top right. It didn't press in very well, and so I did not want to pay the kind of money they were asking for any of those. But this, I felt like since it was much cheaper and in much better shape, I could go for, and that is a Super Pad 8 for the Sega Saturn. This one is in really good shape. Looks like it's lightly used. I can tell that it has been used, but it's still in really good shape. So I don't know if that's a good thing in that this person didn't play a lot of Saturn, or if it's a bad thing because maybe they didn't like it, so they didn't use it much. But it has nice shoulder buttons. All the regular action buttons on the front have good action. Start button is fine. It's got auto fire on and off. And there's this switch on the back that's got a little sort of stick figure person next to it. Looks like they're running. So I don't know if this is 2 speeds or 2 settings for the auto fire. I'll have to look this controller up online and see. But it's a Performance Super Pad 8 P400. The one thing I'm unsure about is the D-pad. It feels a little imprecise, but then the Model 2 Saturn D-pad feels a little bit imprecise to me as well. So I'm not sure what to make of this. I'll have to try it with some Saturn games and see what I think. But it's in good shape, and the price was really low, so I decided to take a chance and give that a shot. So we'll see how that turns out. After I went there, I stopped at another store and picked up 2 additional PSP games. I got Spider-Man 2, and I'm going to go with what Radical Reggie said on a video that he and Metal Jesus did a while back on some PSP games. Igra Union, something like that. We'll Never Fight Alone. He mentioned this game. I think he said he liked it. It's kind of a strategy RPG. So we'll see what this one's like. RPGs on the PSP are getting harder to come by and pricier and pricier all the time. So I thought that was an okay price for one of the probably lesser known and lower, I'm assuming lower selling PSP RPGs. So that was all the game stores I went to in that town. Then after that, I went and hit another town that I wasn't planning on hitting, but I had time before I needed to go and kind of turn in for the night. So I went to another town and hit a couple of stores. I hit a game store that I like to frequent and got one Game Boy game that surprisingly I didn't already have, which is Balloon Kid. So I finally have a copy of Balloon Kid for the original Game Boy. And I also picked up a handful of additional 2600 games for my collection. So I got Planet Patrol, Cosmic Arc, another iMagic game, Dragonfire, yet another iMagic game, MAD, or MAD, which I'd never heard of, but is by US Games Corporation. So we'll find out what that is. And then Sword Quest Earthworld. And I've never played this one. I put a lot of time into Waterworld as a kid because my next door neighbor had it, and we were always trying to figure that game out because the graphics were really cool and we kind of liked the whole puzzle adventure aspect of it. But I've never played Earthworld, so that'll be interesting to see how it compares. And then the final stop that I made was at another game store which is reasonably new to me, or at least this location is new. And they had this box chock full of demo discs. And so I bought a bunch of demo discs for PlayStation and PlayStation 2 for basically nothing, next to nothing. So I got a PlayStation Underground demo disc here from some from October of, looks like maybe it's a launch set, but it's this nice digipack. Whoops, it's got 2 discs and pretty cool, and 2 discs and then this little booklet here. But it's got some pretty nice sort of foil shiny kind of design to it. This is PlayStation Underground 3.4. Oh, I guess these are all numbered. So this is 4.3. This is 3.4. Again, digipack, 2 discs and a little booklet with it. We got, this is one for the original PlayStation. This is PlayStation Underground 2.4. And again, 2 discs, original PlayStation, a bunch of games on it. Tomb Raider 3, A Bug's Life, Apocalypse, which I think that's the one that's got Bruce Willis. Bomberman World, Brave Fencer, Masashi, plus video of Twisted Metal 3 and Siphon Filter. Love me some Siphon Filter. This is 4.2, and this has got Legend of Dragoon, Star Wars Episode 1 Jedi Power Battles, which I put a ton of time into a number of years ago. A friend of mine had that on PlayStation, and we played a lot of co-op on that game. Really fun. This one is, if I can find the number, it says 2000, but I don't see the number on it. Here we go, 4.1. So this has got Twisted Metal 4, Medieval 2. Looks like it is still for the original PlayStation. And Legend of Dragoon, Siphon Filter 2, Spider-Man. This one is a PlayStation 2 one. It is 4.4. And this one's kind of cool. It's a full fold-out, sort of an accordion design. And so it's got all kinds of artwork on it. And then, of course, repping the PS1. 2 discs there. Looks like one for the original PlayStation and then a DVD for the PlayStation 2. So that's kind of cool that they're doing both at the same time. This is, oh, and then I've got one more PlayStation Underground. This is Volume 3, Issue 3, so 3.3. This is both for the original PlayStation. And this one has stuff for a number of games. Looks like a lot of racing games. A Crash racing game, and then and then Tiny Tanks. I remember playing Tiny Tanks back in the day. And then this is just a standard, interactive sampler disc CD, except this is just the sleeve. I didn't check to make sure the disc wasn't in it. So I guess I'll have to look out for the disc. But yeah. In addition to the demo discs, I picked up a couple of other things. I got a couple additional PSP games. We got Silent Hill Origins. And I finally broke down and spent money on a Naruto game. This is Naruto Ultimate Ninja Heroes. There's like 4 or 5 of these games on the PSP, I think. I am not a fan of the anime. I've never watched it. I don't know anything about it. But those games always kind of sell for a little bit more than what I'm usually excited about paying. But I need to, since I'm trying to go for the whole collection, I eventually have to pick them up. So I might as well get them now before they rocket up in price. And since this is not video gaming, but it is gaming, finally, the last thing that I grabbed was I've started to do some tabletop gaming with some friends, and we've got involved in a Dungeons and Dragons game with a dungeon master that's done a few campaigns, and my one friend has, or a couple of my friends have played in games before. So I got a couple of dice sets, a red one and a green one that I picked up at the same game store that I got the last two PSP games and all those demo discs from. And so anyway, fun to have those, and now I can finally, instead of having to borrow dice, I can actually bring my own. So anyway, that's all I've got this time. Kind of broke the bank on this on this trip, so it may be a while before you see another collection video or pickups video from me, because I'm gonna have to recover from the insanity of everything that I've picked up over the last 3 days, plus the 2 boxes from Zagnorch, and I know he's already working on another box for me. So it may be a little bit before you see another pickups video. Hopefully, in the coming weeks, I'll be able to shore up my setup and actually start making real content videos again, or start, get back to the content videos rather than just the pickups, because I'd like to start actually incorporating reviews and some of that stuff. But in the meantime, let me know what you guys think of this haul, the huge haul that I got, or any of the items in here particularly exciting to you. Like I said, I'm excited to get some of these things, like some of these 2600 games, like Miner 2049er, Jawbreaker, Commando, etc. Some of these PSP titles I was kind of excited to find, like those 2 tactics games that I hadn't heard of, and things like that. Excited to have that Geometry Wars Wii game, a couple of these Game Boy games I'd never heard of, like that Out of Gas and that sort of thing. So what of this stuff do you guys recommend? Talk to me about some of these games and some of this stuff. Do any of you out there have one of these, if I can remember where I set it down, one of these performance Super Pad 8s for the Saturn, and what do you think of it? And how many of you guys have the Super Pad 64 Plus, and what do you think of that? I'm pretty excited about this. Anyway, that's all I've got. Thanks for watching, thanks for playing, and game on.